Sophia, the CEO of a large corporation, arrives at the helipad in her luxurious car, with power and confidence radiating from her eyes. She is at the peak of her career, surrounded by assistants and about to embark on yet another business flight. The world seems to revolve around her achievements, and she feels untouchable. As she waits for her flight, a homeless man approaches the helipad. Dirty, wearing ragged clothes and with a lost look in his eyes, he observes the helicopter, seemingly oblivious to the luxury and opulence around him. Seeing him there, Sophia decides to make an offer she believes is impossible. "If you can fly this helicopter, I'll give you $9 million right now." She smiles, finding the situation amusing. She expects nothing more than another laugh. To her, this man is nothing more than a source of entertainment, someone with no value in her world of wealth and success. The man doesn't respond immediately. His eyes, however, don't show desperation. There's something deeper there, something Sophia doesn't notice. He looks at the helicopter and then, with surprising calm, he replies, "I accept." Sophia, taken aback, can't believe what she's hearing. "You're kidding, right?" But Samuel, without hesitation, begins walking toward the helicopter, indifferent to the laughter of the assistants and Sophia's obvious disdain. What Sophia doesn't know is that Samuel isn't just a homeless man. He has a secret, and that secret is going to change everything. Samuel wasn't always like this. He wasn't born on the streets. The life he lived today was not the life he had chosen. If someone had looked at him a few years ago, they would have seen a completely different man. A man with a bright future, impressive skills, and a successful career. He was Major Samuel Green, one of the most skilled pilots in the United States Air Force. A hero to many. A man whose prowess in commanding fighter jets and helicopters was revered among his peers. To him, flying was more than a job. It was a passion, a skill honed over years of intense training, making him unparalleled. He had a promising future, with all of life ahead of him. But everything changed. Sometimes fate puts us before choices that transform the course of our lives in ways we cannot predict. Samuel lost everything. Not in battle, nor in an accident during a mission. No. Samuel's loss was much more personal, more intimate. He lost his family in a car crash, a tragedy that devastated him in ways words could not express. His wife, his daughter, the joy of his life, all was ripped away from him in an instant. He couldn't bear the weight of the pain. The pain of seeing his life crumble before his eyes was unbearable. How could he go on? How could he move forward when the world he knew was gone in a moment? Major Samuel Green, a strong, admired man who once flew the skies with skill, no longer knew who he was. He didn't want to be that man anymore, the hero that everyone saw. The pain was so great and the loss so deep that he withdrew from everything and everyone. He made a drastic decision. He fled. He abandoned his career, his city, his identity. Samuel disappeared. The name everyone knew was lost with him, as if it had never existed. He adopted a new life, a life of invisibility, a life on the streets. He chose to live as a homeless man, not out of financial need, but out of emotional necessity. He wanted to disappear, to leave behind everything that reminded him of the pain he couldn't endure. The combat pilot, the hero, transformed into the invisible man. He wanted to get lost, to live without expectations, without obligations, without the weight of what he had been. On the streets, Samuel found a new peace, a peace that the silence and solitude offered him. He withdrew from the world, to never again be remembered as the man who lost everything. But even there, on the streets, there was something he could never escape. His skill as a pilot. He hadn't left that part of his life behind. He knew what he was capable of. He knew his abilities could surprise, but he didn't want to be seen as someone who could be called to act in a moment of crisis, someone remembered as a hero. Not anymore. He just wanted to be Samuel, the man who ran away, the man who lived away from all expectations. The decision to abandon his former life was difficult but necessary. He knew that even without anything left, what remained of his life still had value, not for the world, but for himself. Pride, vanity, and the obsession with status had been replaced by a simple, anonymous life where he could, in some way, heal his wounds. Each day on the streets, though painful, was also a step toward accepting his new reality, and he was finally learning to live with it. But what Sophia didn't know was that the man standing before her wasn't just a homeless man. He wasn't just someone lost, someone without hope. She didn't know that this man had once been one of the best pilots of his generation. His skill was unmatched. She didn't know that Samuel, despite his current state, still carried with him the calm and precision of a highly trained pilot, someone capable of extraordinary feats if needed. That, he kept hidden. Sophia, in her arrogance, never imagined that this humiliating offer to fly a helicopter was something he could actually do. She couldn't see beyond her own narrow view of the world, where only financial success and appearances mattered. She thought she was just playing with a man who was worth nothing. But what she didn't know was that by facing Samuel, she was about to witness something she would never have imagined. He was no longer the man the world thought he was. Samuel was now a man searching for something much bigger than any money prize or recognition. He was searching for a way to regain control of his own life, to reconcile with who he truly was. And now, he was about to show Sophia, in a way she could never have imagined, what it really meant to be a hero. Not a hero of titles and medals, but a real-life hero, a hero of soul and courage. But before anything, he had to face the greatest challenge of his life, his own pain and the courage to allow his true identity to be revealed. Sophia was used to being in control. As CEO of one of the most respected companies in the country, she had the power to make and break destinies, to make decisions that affected thousands of people. Her life was a constant stream of victories, high-level meetings, and multi-million-dollar deals. People admired her, even feared her. She was the embodiment of success, an example of everything one could achieve with hard work, intelligence, and, of course, money. Her view of the world was simple. Those with money and power were above everyone else. A person's worth, to Sophia, was directly tied to what they had in their bank account, the number of followers on social media, and the social status they held. She saw no value in people who didn't fit this mold. To her, the others were just background figures, insignificant characters who passed through her life like a passing breeze. She never cared about the stories people carried, the struggles they faced, or the traumas that shaped their lives. To Sophia, everything was superficial. The world was a game she always won, and everyone else was there to serve her purposes. She didn't see people. She only saw what they could do for her, what they could offer. And this made her immune to empathy. So when Sophia saw Samuel, the homeless man, approaching the helipad, she felt no compassion. There was no curiosity about his life, no interest in understanding what he was going through. To her, he was a failure, someone who didn't know how to take advantage of life's opportunities. Someone who, if they had made the right choices, would be living a comfortable life like hers. She looked at him with a mixture of disdain and contempt. He was the type of person she saw as a flaw in the system, someone who had been left behind, who hadn't been able to reach the same goals she had, someone who had lost the battle of life. And for Sophia, that was enough to judge him. But as she always did, she didn't miss the opportunity to have a little fun with him. Sophia had a way of playing with people, of toying with them like pieces on a board. It was as if she were always doing something fun, something that put her in a position of superiority. It was a way to prove even more that she was above the rest of the world. That's how she made the offer to Samuel. An offer that, to her, was nothing more than a joke, something to entertain herself and show who was in charge. She didn't expect him to react in any way other than the desperation of someone who knew they couldn't fulfill the challenge. But when he accepted, she didn't know what to do with that. What was happening here made no sense. How could this man who could barely keep his eyes open from exhaustion and misery even think about flying a helicopter? She looked at him, confused, but her arrogance made her continue with the game. For Sophia, this was just fun. The idea of giving $9 million to someone like Samuel seemed absurd. To her, money was something that needed to be earned, something given to those who deserved it. Samuel, in her view, didn't deserve even a look of compassion, let alone such an absurd amount. She thought he wouldn't understand the magnitude of the offer. She thought he would feel humiliated or, at most, laugh and walk away. But that never happened. Sophia's arrogance was her biggest weakness. She was so blinded by her worldview that she couldn't see that sometimes what others have is far more valuable than money or status. The skills Samuel carried inside him, his life experience, the wisdom he gained through pain and loss, were things Sophia could never buy. And yet, she continued to be trapped in her bubble of superficiality, believing that her financial position made her superior to everyone else. She couldn't see that Samuel wasn't just another beggar on the street. He carried a story of overcoming, of pain and of choice. But to Sophia that meant nothing. She was so used to being the one with all the answers that she barely noticed how the people around her were silently suffering, carrying heavy burdens, while she lived in a reality where everything seemed easy. This made her distant from the true essence of things. Sophia didn't know what it was to lose. She didn't know what it was to feel small, insignificant, or invisible. She didn't know what it was to be forgotten by the world, like Samuel. She was surrounded by people who flattered her, who put her on a pedestal. She was surrounded by people who took advantage of her position to achieve their own goals. But she never knew what the real struggle was. And this made her despise what truly mattered in life: humanity, the ability to connect with others, to feel empathy and compassion. And it was in this arrogance that Sophia made the fatal mistake. She thought she could play with Samuel's life, not realizing she was about to discover that behind that seemingly insignificant man, there was a story, a strength, and a skill that could completely destroy her worldview. Sophia watched Samuel with a look of disdain. The offer she had just made seemed so absurd, so out of context, that she could hardly believe he had accepted. Her arrogance was so ingrained in her that the idea of someone like Samuel, even considering taking on such a challenge, made her laugh inside. After all, she saw this man as someone of no value, merely a reflection of failure, a walking reminder of the flaws in the system. What she didn't know was that Samuel wasn't what he seemed. He wasn't there to pursue the $9 million, nor to seek revenge for his situation. He was there for a much deeper, more personal reason, something Sophia couldn't even begin to understand. Sophia settled into her chair, sitting upright like someone in control of everything, watching the man before her. She expected him to back down, for him to realize how ridiculous the offer was and walk away. But Samuel did the exact opposite. He stepped forward calmly and serenely, heading toward the helicopter, as though it were just another routine mission, as if he were returning to a place that had always been his. For a moment, Sophia paused to analyze the scene. There was something in Samuel's eyes that she couldn't identify. Something beyond the tattered appearance, the dirty clothes, the unshaved beard, and the weary expression. She saw determination, and that didn't make sense. It didn't make sense in a man who, until that moment, she considered nothing more than a mere pawn in the social game. Samuel didn't seem intimidated. In fact, he seemed to be handling the situation so naturally that it made her feel uncomfortable. But what she couldn't understand the most was why he was accepting the offer. She didn't know that for Samuel, this moment meant more than a simple test of skill. It was in fact a chance for him to redeem his pain, a chance to show that he was still capable of something, that he still had something to offer the world, even if it was just a simple flight, even if it had nothing to do with the $9 million he had been challenged to earn. Sophia was trapped in her narrow view of what mattered. To her, money was the key to everything. Money symbolized power, control, and a person's worth in society. That's what she had always believed. Money was her only currency, and she used it with mastery. She looked at Samuel with the certainty that he was nothing but a burden, a useless obstacle, a human being who had failed at life. She couldn't see in him the depth, the skill, and the strength that he hid. While she reflected on her own certainties, Samuel was already inside the helicopter. He settled in naturally, as if he were in his own environment. His movements were precise and careful, not of someone trying to learn something for the first time, but of someone who had done this thousands of times. He knew what he was doing. Sophia couldn't understand. She didn't know who he truly was, and that made her uneasy. She watched, stunned, as Samuel began adjusting the helicopter controls. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't hesitant. On the contrary, he was completely in control of the situation. His focus was on the details, on the controls, on the movements of the helicopter. He didn't care what she thought, what the others around him thought. He was there to prove something to himself. More than anything, he was there to rediscover his lost confidence, to feel again what it meant to be in command of something as powerful and beautiful as that helicopter. Sophia, on the other hand, didn't know what to think. She was in disbelief, her eyes fixed on Samuel. She didn't know if what was happening was a spectacle of pure luck or real skill. The idea that a homeless man could be in control of something as complex and dangerous as a helicopter seemed impossible to her. After all, she had never met anyone who wasn't willing to make sacrifices for success. And for her, success had always been a matter of social and material ascension. Samuel seemed to be defying every rule she knew. The offer she made was, for her, a game of power, a way to play with who was in charge, who could humiliate the other without even thinking about the consequences. But for Samuel, this was a test of something much deeper. He was about to enter unfamiliar territory, where the skills he had buried were about to resurface. He wasn't there to play, nor to prove anything to anyone, but to reconnect with the part of himself he had left behind. He was no longer interested in the money or the recognition. He wanted, more than anything, to rediscover his own essence, his own strength. As Sophia watched, each of Samuel's movements seemed to confirm what she didn't want to accept. He was at home, and that made her question everything she believed. The tension was thick in the air. Sophia, still with her jaw clenched and her eyes locked on the helicopter, couldn't look away from Samuel. What had once seemed like a game, something trivial she could control, was now turning into something unsettling. Samuel's calmness was unbelievable. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't hesitating. He was simply flying the helicopter as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if he had done it hundreds of times before. Sophia felt a shiver run down her spine. She didn't know whether this was a trick or an incredible stroke of luck. She couldn't understand how a man who could barely keep himself clean or comb his hair could be so competent in something so complex. But that was exactly what she was seeing. Samuel, a man she had considered insignificant, was doing something extraordinary. Meanwhile, Sophia's assistants were in a state of shock. They didn't say a word, but the exchanged glances between them revealed the same astonishment. No one, absolutely no one, expected Samuel to even take the first step in the process of flying that helicopter, let alone perform the flight so calmly and precisely. They couldn't understand how this was possible. And deep down, Sophia didn't understand either. She had underestimated Samuel so profoundly that now she was starting to realize she had made a mistake. She was witnessing something that couldn't be explained just by logic, money, or social position. This was much more than a simple challenge. It was something beyond her understanding. As Samuel maneuvered the helicopter with a skill that seemed to flow from within him, a series of thoughts raced through Sophia's mind. She tried to find an explanation, any explanation for what was happening. She looked at him once more, trying to find some sign of insecurity or doubt. But what she saw was the absolute confidence of someone who was exactly where they were meant to be. And it was in that moment that something inside Sophia began to change. She realized that the man before her wasn't who she thought he was. Samuel wasn't there just to show he could fly a helicopter. He was there to show her, and the world, that there are no limits for those who truly understand what it takes to be great. As she observed the perfection with which Samuel handled the helicopter, Sophia's mind began to race. She thought about everything she knew about people like him, those who lived on the streets, those who were seen as failures by society. She had always believed that these people were there because they didn't know what to do with their lives, that they were stuck in their fate of poverty and disgrace. But now, seeing Samuel, she began to question that view, and as she struggled with her own beliefs and the internal changes that were beginning to take place, the helicopter rose even higher. cutting through the skies with a precision that only someone with a deep knowledge of aircraft could achieve. Samuel was piloting like a master, his body relaxed, his movements almost automatic. He was in his element, and that was becoming more and more evident. For Samuel, this moment wasn't just about flying. It was a reaffirmation of who he truly was, of what he still carried inside him. He was no longer trapped by the man who had lost everything. He was being who he truly was, and that was something he couldn't hide, something he couldn't deny anymore. As he performed the most complex maneuver, something that Sophia and her assistants hadn't anticipated, Samuel took the helicopter to a new level of skill, something that left everyone speechless. He wasn't just flying, he was dancing with the machine, controlling it with an almost artistic precision. The sound of the engines was smooth, almost as if the helicopter was in complete harmony with Samuel. And as he executed the maneuver, Sophia realized something she didn't want to accept. She was seeing a man who had nothing to lose, a man who was there to show the true greatness that comes from experience, pain, and overcoming. She was seeing Samuel's past being revealed before her eyes, and she didn't know what to do with that. With each passing second, Sophia's facade began to crumble. She slowly started to understand that the value of a person wasn't in what they appeared to be, or in what the world expected them to be. A person's worth is in their essence, in who they are deep down, in the experiences they carry, and in what they can do when challenged to reveal their true potential. Samuel was no longer the man she thought he was. He was much more. He was someone who had suffered, who had lost, but who still carried within him the power to transform any situation. He wasn't a defeated man. He was a man in search of his own redemption, his own peace. As Sophia processed this new reality, Samuel executed the final maneuver, landing the helicopter with a smoothness only a true master could achieve. He had finished. The helicopter was on the ground, and silence took over the environment. Sophia didn't know what to do. She looked at Samuel, still eyeing the man who, in a single act, had shattered all her assumptions about life, about others, and about herself. The helicopter gently touched the ground, the sound of the rotor gradually slowing until it disappeared. Samuel made one last adjustment to the control panel with an unshakable calm, shutting off the engine with the same precision with which he had turned it on. He had completed the flight as if it were the most natural thing in the world, and although his movements showed no sign of emotion, something deep inside him was being reconfigured. The loneliness of the streets, the bitter memories, and the pain of a life abandoned were starting to dissolve, as if the act of flying had, in some way, released a part of him he thought he had lost forever. Sophia remained silent, her eyes fixed on the man who had just shocked her in an indescribable way. She, so used to having everything under control, now found herself completely disarmed, speechless, without answers. She had offered $9 million as if they were crumbs, something trivial. But what she didn't know was that Samuel wasn't interested in her money. The real surprise wasn't in Samuel's skill as a pilot. It was in the way he handled the situation, his serene attitude and his unshakable calm in the face of the challenge. The silence in the air was palpable, and Sophia's expression shifted from one of disbelief to something more subtle. Recognition. She began to realize that she had made a mistake. Not just a mistake regarding Samuel, but a profound error about the way she saw the world, people, and their value. She had judged without knowing, had looked at that man and seen only a reflection of failure, but what she hadn't seen was the complexity of the human soul, the capacity for resilience that often lies hidden in those we most need to despise in order to feel superior. Samuel stepped out of the helicopter and, without paying much attention to Sophia or her assistant's stares, began walking toward the small group watching them. His steps were firm, but there was no arrogance in them. Unlike Sophia, who was always on a pedestal, Samuel seemed to personify humility, simplicity. He didn't care what people thought. To him, the only real value was living with dignity, being true to himself, and seeking inner peace. Sophia was still trying to process what had just happened. She knew the man before her wasn't just anyone. He had mastered the helicopter with an uncommon skill, as if he were an experienced pilot. He had performed a spectacular maneuver, an acrobatic feat that would leave any conventional helicopter pilot speechless. But there was something more, something not in his technical ability, but in the way he executed the flight. There was a kind of tranquility in him, a quiet confidence that defied everything Sophia thought she knew about people in the world. Sophia, with her mind racing, finally broke the silence. She looked at Samuel and asked, her voice trembling slightly, "How did you do that?" She didn't expect a clear answer. There was no way she could fully understand what was happening. But there was something in her words, a mix of confusion with a growing admiration. Samuel, his head lowered, responded simply, "I just did what I know how to do. It's not that hard." The answer was direct and without vanity, and that made the impact even greater. For Sophia, it felt like a punch in the stomach. He wasn't boasting. He wasn't trying to show he was better than her. He was just speaking the truth. He knew what he was doing, and that was enough. But what Sophia didn't know was that, for Samuel, it wasn't about the money. It wasn't about fame or attention. He had given everything he had for that flight because it represented something deeper. He had reconnected with a part of himself he feared he had lost forever. Sophia stood there, frozen, watching Samuel with a mixture of confusion and respect. She didn't know how to react. The man she had underestimated wasn't just completing a difficult task. He was giving her a lesson she had never learned, the lesson of humility, of how to look at others without judgment, of how a person's value cannot be measured by their social status, their appearance, or what society says they are. Sophia felt a wave of shame flood her chest. She thought of all the times she had looked at other people and dismissed them for not fitting into the mold she considered right. She thought about how she had always judged people by their clothes, the car they drove, the bank account they had, and how she herself had been judged for so long only by the things she possessed. But, in front of Samuel, she now saw that true value in someone wasn't in those things. True value was in experiences, in choices, in the heart. As much as Sophia wanted to walk away from this, as much as she tried to rationalize and find a logical explanation for what had just happened, she couldn't. Samuel wasn't just a homeless man. He wasn't just someone who had fallen, someone who had lost everything. He was a man who had made a choice to live outside the world, but still carried something inside him that she couldn't even imagine. He was more than any amount of money, more than any recognition. And it was then, in that silent moment, that Sophia finally understood. Samuel wasn't there to show his skill as a pilot. He was there to show something much bigger. He was there to teach her a lesson she never imagined she needed to learn. The atmosphere around the helicopter was thick with an unusual tension, something Sophia couldn't fully comprehend. As the assistants exchanged curious glances, she stood there, motionless, watching Samuel as if he were a piece of a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. The man before her had done something she could never have predicted. He had accepted the challenge without hesitation, and more than that, he had demonstrated a skill that none of her top executives or experienced pilots could even imagine. Sophia was starting to feel something she wasn't accustomed to feeling: discomfort. The kind of discomfort that comes when someone shatters your deepest certainties, your beliefs about the world. She wasn't just seeing a homeless man who had become a helicopter pilot by luck. She was seeing Samuel's true essence, his skill, his story, and the weight of the pain he carried, without anyone knowing. She was beginning to realize that everything she had believed she knew about the value of people was wrong. The offer of $9 million she had made hung in the air like an empty promise. She had made that offer with a sarcastic smile, thinking it would be just a game, entertainment, something that would make her feel superior for a moment. But now, seeing Samuel, not as a lost man, but as a man who had something she could never buy, something that couldn't be purchased with money, Sophia began to understand the gravity of the situation. She was facing something much bigger than she had imagined. Samuel didn't need $9 million. What he wanted, what he truly wanted, couldn't be given to him with a blank check. She felt an emptiness in her chest, the feeling that everything she had achieved, all the business meetings, The million-dollar contracts and the victories in the corporate world didn't carry the same weight as what Samuel carried with him. There was no way for her to measure the value of a man like Samuel with the same tools she used to measure everything around her. He was a reminder of everything she had never understood, of everything she had ignored in her relentless pursuit of success and power. He was there in front of her, not because he had chosen to be a winner in the way she understood the term, but because he had made a much deeper choice, the choice to be who he was, regardless of what the world thought. Sophia looked at Samuel, unsure of what to say. She opened her mouth several times, but no words seemed enough to express the complexity of her feelings. She knew that what he had just done, what he had demonstrated, wasn't just about the flight itself. It was about life, about the choice not to be defined by his appearance, by his situation, by anything the world could impose on him. He was showing her that true greatness isn't measured in wealth, fame, or power. True greatness comes from the ability to, even after everything that is lost, remain true to oneself. It was then that Sophia had an epiphany. She understood on some deep level that the offer she had made to Samuel meant nothing. The money, the power, the social position, none of it really mattered to him. Samuel wasn't there to be rescued by a sum of dollars. He was there, in that moment, to rescue himself. He was showing her that true wealth isn't measured by how much you have, but by how much you can resist, survive, and stay true to your essence no matter what the world says. Sophia suddenly felt small. The walls she had built around herself, her belief that she was above everyone, crumbled. She had been blinded by her own vanity, by her own pride, and now she was faced with a reality she could not ignore. Samuel, with his simplicity and his skill, had challenged her in a way she never could have predicted. She now saw clearly that he didn't need $9 million. He didn't need anything she had to offer. He already had everything he needed. He had himself. And it was in that moment that Sophia made a decision. She, the woman who had always been in control, the woman who had always believed that money and power could fix everything, now found herself in front of an undeniable truth. She was facing a man who, without effort, had destroyed all her certainties and showed her that the true measure of a person isn't in possessions but in inner strength, dignity, and the ability to rise again after the greatest fall. "I'll give you the $9 million, Sophia finally said, her voice filled with the sincerity she rarely felt. She continued almost unwillingly, "And also a job, a place in my company as a consultant. I want you to be what you were before the loss, before the pain." Samuel, however, looked at her with a serenity that surprised her even more. He smiled slightly, but his smile wasn't one of victory. It was one of silent acceptance. "No, Sophia. What I want most now isn't money. It's not a position or a title. What I want is peace. I want to live the life I've chosen far from what made me suffer. That's all I need." And it was in that moment that Samuel's true greatness was revealed to Sophia. She had underestimated him, but he was so much more than she had ever imagined. Sophia stood there watching Samuel, the man she thought she knew, but in reality, had never truly understood. She didn't know what to expect after his words. She didn't know if he would stay, if he would accept her offer, or if he would reject it with yet another of his simple and direct responses. But what she didn't expect, what she wasn't prepared to understand, was that he would reject the offer she thought was her greatest gift. Samuel didn't want anything more that she had to offer. To him, money meant nothing. The social status he could achieve by working at her company also meant nothing. He wasn't interested in returning to the world that, in his mind, had abandoned him. He had made a much deeper choice. The choice to live his own life, free from external expectations, free from the need to prove his worth to others. He didn't need more validation, more recognition, or more trophies. He had found something far more valuable than all of that, inner peace, and in that rejection lay the greatest lesson Sophia could learn. She had become lost in a world where everything seemed to be a competition, where people were judged by what they had or what they did, and where the value of a human life seemed to depend on how much one had achieved or accumulated. But before Samuel, she was confronted with something much greater, The value of life wasn't in external things, but in internal choices, in how each person deals with their own demons, their own pain, and their own struggles. Samuel made her see that Sophia's biggest mistake, the mistake of many in her position, was believing that success was something to be achieved at the expense of others, that happiness could be bought or measured in numbers and material achievements. Samuel, with his simplicity and refusal to accept anything beyond what he truly needed, made her question everything she believed about what truly mattered in life. And although she couldn't admit it out loud at that moment, something inside Sophia began to change. She knew she wouldn't be the same person after that experience. She knew that the way she viewed the world, people, and even herself needed to be reassessed, that she needed to learn to look at others with more empathy and understanding, without judging them just by appearances or the labels society gave them. Sophia needed to understand that often, the greatest riches aren't in material possessions but in what's invisible to the eyes. The untold stories, the pains each person carries, the internal battles everyone faces. Sophia was faced with a choice. She could continue on her path, holding on to her beliefs about what is important and who deserves what, or she could accept what Samuel had just shown her, that true greatness lies in the ability to be humble, to learn from others, to look at a person beyond social labels and first impressions. And while she hadn't made an immediate decision, Sophia knew her journey had just begun. She had encountered a truth that for so long she had ignored, the truth that a person's worth can't be measured by what they have, but by the courage to be who they are, by the strength to continue, by their ability to learn and grow. And as she watched Samuel walk away, heading toward his new life, free from all the chains of a society that had marginalized him, Sophia felt a faint sense of admiration for him. He hadn't let himself be defined by his circumstances. He wasn't trapped by the past or the future. He was living in the present in its purest form with a peace that, in her fast-paced life full of commitments, she had never experienced. "Samuel," she murmured, but he didn't hear. He was already distant, walking back to anonymity, to the life he had chosen to live, where he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He didn't need anyone's approval, didn't need more wealth or more power. He had already found what many spend their whole lives searching for and never manage to achieve: true peace with oneself. Sophia stayed there for a few minutes, in silence, reflecting on everything that had happened. She thought about the times she had looked at people with disdain, thinking she knew what was best for them, thinking success was a straight line, a race where the only goal was to reach the finish line. But now she knew that the true journey was internal, that true success wasn't about accumulating wealth or power, but about understanding that each person carries their own story, their own battle, and that often, the greatest value in a human being is their ability to choose to be more than their circumstances. She looked at the sky, now cloudless, and felt a lightness. Perhaps she too had the chance to start over, to rediscover herself, to see the world with new eyes. Perhaps the true wealth was in learning from the lessons life gives us, not just in the achievements we can flaunt. Thank you so much for watching this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a like. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next ones. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think about the choices made by the characters? Do you agree with how things unfolded, or would you have done something different? Drop your opinion in the comments below.